Government agencies have at times strongly resisted declassification of these types of files. When Congress passed the JFK Records Act, they by law created the Assassination Records Review Board. The Review Board's mission is to locate, review, and release as much material as possible relating to the death of John F. Kennedy. COPA has been working with the Review Board to help identify and prioritize the release of assassination records. Support COPA and help take advantage of this historic opportunity to open the files. COPA held its third annual national conference on October 18th through 20th, 1996 in Washington, D.C.
Presentation both in the depth of what it's going to give you and in the fact that it will allow you, for the most part, to draw your own conclusions. You'll hear from Vince Palomera on some of the work he's done in the Secret Service, and time permitting, you'll hear some things from me on the Warren O mission, and then we hope to take questions and answers. If a moderator arrives, hopefully they'll arrive with the standard index cards. If not, we'll wing it somehow. Don't worry. So please, let's welcome John Armstrong. He's going to tell us about some strange events in the formative years of the Oswald family. John?
Good morning. My talk's on Oswald's possessions, so I'll get started. For years, researchers speculated that the FBI played a part in covering up certain areas of the Kennedy assassination. The existence of this memo sent to FBI field offices warning of an attempted presidential assassination on November 17th was denied by Hoover. When Dallas Police Chief Curry told the press about FBI contacts with Oswald, Hoover became enraged. According to Curry, Hoover called Gordon Shanklin, his agent in charge of the Dallas FBI office, and told him that if Curry did not retract his statement regarding FBI contacts with Oswald within 30 minutes, Shanklin would be through in Dallas. The more they tried to deny contact with Oswald, the more examples of contact surfaced. Critics suspected a cover-up, but lacked proof. My presentation relies on government documents and evidence relating to the FBI's handling of Oswald's possessions, obtained by the Dallas police from his two residences. You will see how the FBI twice obtained these items from the Dallas police. You will see how evidence was manufactured, manipulated, and altered while in custody of the FBI. You will see how these possessions, some original and some altered, were given to the Warren Commission and later transferred to the National Archives. By the end of this presentation, you will understand the reasons for the manipulation of this evidence. Shortly after Oswald's arrest on Friday afternoon, Dallas Police Captain Fritz sent detectives to Ruth Payne's house and 1026 North Beckley to conduct searches and look for evidence. They confiscated hundreds of items belonging to Oswald. Within hours, the FBI was insisting those items be sent to Washington, even though the FBI had no jurisdiction. On November 23rd, the FBI received the Manisher Carcano rifle, bullet fragments, cartridge casings, the blanket from the Payne garage, the .38 Smith & Wesson revolver, and Oswald's shirt. Until recently, I was under the impression that this was the only evidence the Dallas police had turned over to the FBI on November 23rd. However, documents show the FBI obtained the bulk of Oswald's possessions the day after the assassination and took them to Washington. These items were neither inventoried nor photographed before they left Dallas. They were in FBI custody for 2 days and then returned to the Dallas police. Proof of this comes from Dallas Police Chief Jesse Curry and FBI agent James Cadigan's testimony. Now please refer to the first 2 pages of the handouts provided. Does everyone have the handout? Curry was questioned by Warren Commission member Alan Dulles. Curry said, "We kept getting calls from the FBI. They wanted this evidence up in Washington, but Captain Fritz told me, well, I need the evidence here." Finally, about midnight, Friday night, November 22nd, we agreed to let the FBI have all the evidence. And they said they would have an agent stand by, and when they were finished with it, return it to us.
We got several calls insisting we send this, and nobody would tell me exactly who it was that was insisting. They insinuated it was someone in high authority that was requesting this, and we finally agreed, as a matter of trying to cooperate with them. At this point, Allen Dulles adjourned the meeting. Now, when they reconvened, Warren Commission Attorney Rankin stated, "Chief Curry, I was asking you, just as we closed your examination before lunch, about Exhibit 709. Wrong. When they adjourned for lunch, Curry was telling them about how someone in high authority in Washington kept insisting they wanted the evidence obtained by the Dallas police. There was nothing said about Exhibit 709. The remainder of Jesse Curry's testimony, his statements referring to the FBI's obtaining of evidence the day after the assassination, has been deleted. Now please refer to the third sheet of your handouts. Also deleted were statements by James Cadigan, an FBI document specialist in Washington. Cadigan received Oswald's possessions the day after the assassination. When Cadigan was asked by Warren Commission Attorney Eisenberg about one of the items, he said, quote, "I know that on November 23rd, when the vast bulk of this material came in, that it was photographed. But to select one item out of 400 or 500, I cannot say definitely I recall seeing this before it was photographed." He said, "Initially, the first big batch of evidence was brought into the laboratory on November 23rd, 1963, and this consisted of many, many items." The Warren Commission attorney was surprised by Cadigan's answer. He said, 1963? Cadigan replied, November 23rd, 1963. It was a very large quantity of evidence that was brought in. Please refer now to the 4th and 5th pages of the handouts. This is Cadigan's deposition before the Warren Commission. Cadigan was asked about Exhibit 820, Oswald's Fair Play for Cuba identity card. "Do you know why 820 was not reprocessed or desilvered?" Cadigan answered, "Time was of the essence, and this material, I believe, was returned to the Dallas police within 2 or 3 days." Now look at sheet 6 of your handouts, Cadigan's testimony as it appears in the Warren volumes. Cadigan's answer has been changed. It now reads, "No, this is a latent fingerprint matter." Now, we don't know who changed Cadigan's testimony. It may have been Cadigan himself. But we do know his reference to the FBI having custody of Oswald's possessions the day after the assassination has been deleted. It would be very helpful to talk to Cadigan. But unfortunately, he was one of 5 top FBI officials who died in a 4-month period in 1977. Minox film was found in Oswald's sea bag in Ruth Payne's garage on November 22nd. The FBI had this film in Washington 2 days before they officially received Oswald's possessions from the Dallas police. In this document, they requested a comparison of the Minox film recovered from possessions of Lee Harvey Oswald with Minox film located in a New York FBI file to see if the films were exposed in the same camera. Now, the New York file is marked LOC-FAB in the upper left-hand corner. Now, that means Location Foreign Agent Bureau. It is also marked ESP-R, which is Espionage Russia. Someone in the FBI suspected that film found in the Payne's garage in Irving, Texas, may have been exposed in the same camera as film found in an espionage file in New York. Someone knew a lot more about Oswald than they were willing to admit. One more thing. This FBI document came from the National Archives. I've requested copies of the complete file from the FBI, but they deny the file's existence. They claim there's no number with that file. We now know the FBI obtained many of Oswald's possessions on November 23rd, kept them till the 25th, then returned them to Dallas. We know Cadigan knew about this, and his statements to the Warren Commission were changed. We don't know what the FBI did with those possessions while in their custody, but we have some clues. At 8 o'clock the evening of November 22nd, 6 hours after Oswald's arrest, FBI agents were at Monig Junior High in Fort Worth looking for Oswald's junior high school records. They were met by the school principal, Mr. Ree Bostic. 12 hours later, 2 agents were at W.C. Stripling Junior High, also in Fort Worth, to pick up Oswald's school attendance records. Frank Cudlady, the assistant principal, met those agents.
I lived at 4225 Curzon at that time. From Mr. Wiley, who was my principal, telling me to go to school and to go to the records file and get Lee Harvey Oswald's records, and that someone from the FBI would be there to pick them up. That's exactly what I did. I went to school, I went to the records files, got his records out. I did open them, I did look at them, kind of in a cursory way. And the only thing I can recall is that the records for Stripling were incomplete in that he didn't attend there a full year. I put them back in a brown envelope and left them on my desk and waited 10, 15 minutes or perhaps longer. And two gentlemen came in, showed me identification that they were FBI agents. I gave them records, and the best I remember, one of them did open the envelope and kind of look at it. And they thanked me and they left, and I locked the doors and I went home. And that's about all I know about Lee Harvey Oswald.
Okay. Want to shut that off, Robert? We're done with that. We're done with that. Okay. 8 o'clock in the morning after the assassination. Why the urgency to pick up junior high school records in Fort Worth? And before I answer that question, I want to show you a 10-year timeline of Oswald's life. From September 1952 through June 1962. During this entire 10-year period, Lee Oswald lived in Fort Worth only 4 months, July through October 1956. The only school he attended in Fort Worth was Arlington Heights High School. Before 1956, he attended junior high in New York and New Orleans. After 1956, he was in the Marines and then left for Russia. Now, 6 hours after Oswald's arrest, the FBI's at Stripling and Monig in Fort Worth attempted to obtain his junior high school records. Why? Because someone at the FBI knew Oswald's background. Someone knew he first entered junior high in New York in September 1952, and he graduated from Beauregard Junior High in New Orleans in 1955. The FBI had obtained his graduation photo from the Beauregard yearbook. But someone in the FBI knew that a Lee Harvey Oswald also attended junior high in Fort Worth. Now, he could not have attended junior high in New Orleans and Fort Worth at the same time, yet there were records of Lee Oswald attending junior high in both cities at the same time. The FBI obtained his 7th, 8th, and 9th grade records in New York and New Orleans. Those junior high records can be found in the Warren volumes. But the Stripling Junior High School records obtained by Mr. Cudlady have disappeared. The Stripling records would prove the existence of two Lee Oswalds and raise questions the government was unprepared to deal with. This is the reason the FBI was looking for those records 6 hours after Oswald was arrested. This is the reason the Stripling records have disappeared. On Saturday, November 23rd at 12:30, Captain Fritz showed Oswald an 8x10 photo of himself holding a rifle. Oswald claimed the photo was a forgery. Now, this backyard photo was not officially found by the Dallas police until 3 hours later at Ruth Payne's house. This FBI teletype of December 2nd, 1963, states photograph was found during the search of property of subject Oswald, same being located in a box in the garage of Ruth Payne. And they found a 3x3 snapshot, not an 8x10 enlargement. How do you suppose the Dallas police were able to show Oswald an 8x10 enlargement of the backyard photo 3 hours before it was found at the Paynes? Mr. and Mrs. Hester, owners of the National Photo Labs in Dallas, may have the answer. They made enlargements of the backyard photos the evening of the assassination, the day before Fritz showed Oswald the 8x10 photo. Mr. and Mrs. Hester remember making the enlargements from a transparency furnished by the FBI. Later that Saturday afternoon, the police again searched the Payne residence, this time with a search warrant. They obtained 451 items of evidence belonging to Oswald. Among the items found by Officer Gus Rose was a Minox camera, listed as item number 375. The following statements are from a tape-recorded interview with Gus Rose by a member of the House Select Committee on Assassinations.
Minox camera, was that with Ruth Payne's camera equipment?
No, it was in the sea bag.
Oh, in the sea bag. This was exactly Oswald's right here.
Ruth Payne explained to me, she stood right there while we searched. And she explained that everything in that sea bag in some boxes, a couple of 3 boxes that were there, was Oswald.
You're quite sure that this Minox camera was a camera? I mean, did you open it up and see film in it? Or?
Yes.
This is a little, I'm not up on cameras myself. This is a little camera, isn't it? The Minox?
Very small. It's not any bigger than a half pack of cigarettes.
Okay, I think I've seen pictures.
And you kind of push it together to make it snap.
Right.
And in this particular one, it did have a roll of film in it. And there's no question absolutely that it was a Minox military camera.
And you initialed it?
Yes, I did.
You remember where or how?
Somewhere on the base of the camera, I scratched my initials, and so did Stovall, R.F. Stovall.
Okay, very good. Very good. And I assume that that was part of the property that was turned over to the FBI.
Yes, it was. Now, they later did come back and request that I change that on the invoice to read Minox light meter, but it definitely wasn't a light meter, it was a camera.
A number of the items Gus Rose found at the Payne's house were later photographed on the floor of the Dallas police station. Among those items was a Minox camera. On November 26, J. Edgar Hoover spoke with Nicholas Katzenbach, who'd been talking to the White House about the report the FBI was to render in the Oswald case. This memo states, "This report is to settle the dust insofar as Oswald and his activities are concerned, both from the standpoint that he is the man who assassinated the president and relative to Oswald himself and his activities and background." So the powers in Washington had already decided that Oswald was the lone assassin. FBI officials were working on plans to deal with the assassination. Mr. Belmont advised Sullivan, Division 6 will handle that portion of the report dealing with the assassination attempt and the evidence gathered to show Oswald is responsible. This means that we will have to carefully check the evidence and Oswald's possessions. They clearly understood the importance Oswald's possessions would have in their investigation. On November 25th, Oswald's possessions were photographed by the Dallas police using a photo recordact camera. 5 rolls of film were used. On November 26th, the FBI officially took over the investigation. Agent Warren DeBreeze picked up the 451 items of evidence and the 5 rolls of undeveloped film from the Dallas police. DeBreeze took the film and physical evidence to Washington the following day. The Dallas police requested the FBI process and make 3 prints of each exposure and return all to the Dallas office in this memo acknowledged by FBI agent James Bookout. When the evidence reached FBI headquarters, they realized they had a problem. Some of his possessions could not be made public. For example, what's Oswald doing with a Minox spy camera? This is not the type of camera normally owned by a poor laborer like Oswald. It's an expensive camera now, and it was an expensive camera in 1963. Other items were found that did not fit with their lone assassin theory. Some of those items needed to be changed, some altered, but there was a problem. The Dallas police, who had photographed these items, wanted their photographs developed and returned. The Secret Service was also asking for copies of the photos. They realized they could not develop and return photos of Oswald's possessions if some of those possessions needed to be changed or altered. This presented a problem. A big problem. A conversation took place the afternoon of November 29th between Mr. Brannigan from FBI headquarters in Washington and Gordon Shanklin, head of the Dallas FBI office. Brannigan pointed out the original material, 451 items of evidence, had been rephotographed here at the Bureau in Washington, D.C. He inquired whether the Dallas police still desired to have the Bureau develop the exposed Dallas police film. Shanklin stated the Dallas police needed 3 copies of the photographs of Oswald's possessions, although it did not matter whether those photographs were made from the exposed film submitted by the Dallas police or photographs made at the seat of government. Now, Shanklin's comment is worth rereading. Let's read it again. It did not matter whether the photographs were made from the exposed film submitted by the Dallas police or photographs made at the seat of government. Their problem was solved. They didn't need to send the original Dallas police photographs back to Dallas. Items they did not want the public to see could be replaced with acceptable substitutes. They could re-photograph the substituted items and return the new photographs to the Dallas police. No one would realize what happened. But searching through, altering, and re-photographing Oswald's possessions would take a lot of time, and the Dallas police wanted their photographs as soon as possible. So on December 2nd, the FBI returned some film to Dallas. The Dallas police had photographed 451 items using 5 rolls of film, but the FBI returned only 2 rolls of film that contained photographs of 241 items. 210 photographs were missing. Which items were missing? Well, that's easy. Compare the 451 items listed on the joint Dallas FBI inventory sheet of November 26th. This is Warren Commission Exhibit 2003. With these, if you folks will look in the center here where I am, these are 2 rolls of film that you can buy, and they're available at the Dallas Police Archives. You compare this film with the inventory list shown on the slide, and you'll see which photographs are missing. The first roll of film contains photographs of item 1 through 163. 10 photographs are missing. Curiously, at the end of this reel, someone has spliced on 5 feet of clear film. The clear film is a different brand than the rest of the roll. Now, rolls 2 and 3 and 4 that contained photographs of items 164 through 360 disappeared. Missing. 196 photographs. The last roll of film contains photographs of items 361 through 451 with 4 photographs missing. Do you see what's happened? The FBI received 5 rolls of film from the Dallas police. They found photographs of items they did not want the Dallas police or the public to see. So they cut out the photographs they wanted to hide. They spliced the remaining film together and returned that film to the Dallas police. On December 2nd, Dallas Police Chief Curry was advised of the missing photographs. He immediately wrote FBI Agent Shanklin this letter informing him that items 164 through 360 did not record. Curry requested the FBI to photograph the missing items and forward them to the Dallas police. Curry's request was forwarded to FBI headquarters. How did the FBI account for the missing photographs? They didn't. They tried to blame the Dallas police. This FBI memo says items 164 through 360 were not photographically produced because of faulty technique. On December 15th, Shanklin made a second request for the missing photographs. That afternoon, Washington replied and said, "You will receive as complete a set of photographs as can be made by the Bureau." But they did not send the missing photographs. In fact, they didn't send the photos for another 2 months. They needed time to manipulate Oswald's possessions in order to frame him as the lone assassin and hide his true identity and background. There were rumors a Minox camera had been found in Oswald's possessions. This would be difficult to explain and would heighten the critics' curiosity about Oswald's connections to the intelligence community. FBI agents were dispatched immediately to Dallas Police Headquarters. Officer Gus Rose, who had found the Minox camera in Oswald's sea bag, was confronted by these agents. Officer Rose had these comments to make.
A couple of FBI agents made 3 different trips to our office to talk to me about this camera. They said that after they had received all the property, they found that I had made a mistake, and that really wasn't a camera, it was a Minox light meter. However, as I told them at the time, I was sure I hadn't made a mistake because it definitely was a camera and it definitely did have film in it. However, they wanted me to change that in our property invoice to read Minox light meter and not read Minox camera. We never did change it. Captain Fritz instructed me if I was sure I was right not to make any changes in any reports to stay with what was right.
Undaunted, the FBI sent agents to speak with Officer Hill, the Dallas Police property clerk. They asked Hill to change the property inventory form from a Minox camera to a Minox light meter. He complied with their request and then wrote this memo for his files. It states, The FBI had requested I change the property forms from a Minox camera to a Minox light meter. The Dallas police photographed item 375, which included the Minox camera, on November 25th. Then they gave the undeveloped film to the FBI. When that photograph was returned to the Dallas police a week later, everything but the pedometer had disappeared. Now, how do you suppose that happened? How could you take a photograph of 9 items and have one turn out clear and the other 8 unrecognizable? The photograph had been tampered with, clearly, while in custody of the FBI. They made the Minox camera disappear. They made a new inventory list. The Minox camera was changed to a Minox light meter. The FBI even took a photograph of a light meter and gave it the same identification number as the camera, item 375. Next, they needed to establish ownership of the light meter. From a photograph, Ruth Payne identified the light meter as belonging to her, but she was not shown the original Dallas police photo of items 375, where every item except the pedometer had been faded out. She was shown this photo of items that had been rephotographed by the FBI. All items are clearly recognizable, including the light meter, which was substituted for the Minox camera. But they still had a problem. The police found 4 rolls of Minox film in Oswald's sea bag, listed as inventory item number 377. Now, where you have exposed film, you should have a Minox camera. But the FBI was now claiming they had a light meter, not a camera. They had to come up with a camera. So they found one. On January 31st, 1964, they picked up a Minox camera from Ruth Payne, and they photographed it. This is the camera. The FBI was now ready to tell the public the Minox camera found at the Payne residence belonged to the Paynes. They never did explain what happened to the Minox camera found by Gus Rose in Oswald's sea bag and photographed on the floor of the Dallas Police Department November 23rd. How could they? They found a lot more evidence at the Paynes, enough to provide the motive, means, and opportunity to convict Oswald in the public's mind. Fair Play for Cuba literature and the backyard photos provided the motive. He was a communist. The Klein's department store coupon advertising a Mannlicher Carcano rifle and photos of Oswald holding the rifle provided the means with which to kill the president. Ruth Payne provided Oswald the opportunity by obtaining him the job at the book depository. She gave the FBI items allegedly obtained by Oswald in Mexico, but not until 2 months later. Controversy surrounds each of these items, all found at Ruth Payne's house. Does anyone really doubt the Paynes are involved in this? Now let's refer to pages 7 and 8 of your handouts. Another item found at Ruth Payne's was Oswald's W-2 form from the Pfister Dental Lab, item 168, the first photograph missing from the Dallas police film. Palmer McBride had worked with Oswald at the Pfister Dental Laboratory in 57 and 58, Warren Commission Exhibit 1386. In late 57 and 58, there was also a Lee Oswald in Japan, serving as a radar operator in the Marine Corps. Now, they could not explain Lee Harvey Oswald's in Japan and New Orleans at the same time, so they did what they had to. They lied. They fabricated a story that Oswald had worked at the Pfister Dental Laboratory in 1956, before he entered the Marines, and they created this 1956 W-2 form for the historical record. Fortunately for us, someone screwed up. Prior to creating this fake 1956 form, they asked the Internal Revenue Service to issue a tax ID number. The number issued was 72444-599, and it appears on this form. At the top is a letter from the Internal Revenue Service to the president of Pfister Dental Laboratories. The letter states that the employer identification number on this 1956 W-2 form was not issued by the IRS until January 1964. This W-2 form is an obvious fake. But this W-2 form was not the only one created in January 64. There were 2 others. According to the Warren Report, Oswald was also employed by Dolly Shoe and 2 Jacks prior to joining the Marines in 1956. Dolly Shoe was founded in January 1955 and discontinued business 2.5 years later, October 1957. At the bottom of this slide is Oswald's 1955 W-2 from the Dolly Shoe. At the top is a letter from the Internal Revenue Service to Maury Goodman, former owner of the Dolly Shoe Company. The IRS states that the tax ID number appearing on the 1955 Dolly Shoe W-2 form was not issued until January 1964. Now, this was 7 years after Dolly Shoe went out of business. The tax ID number appearing on the 2-Jack W-2 form for 1955 and 56 was also issued by the IRS in January 64. Now, Oswald did work for these companies, but not at the time indicated on the W-2 forms. These are not the original W-2 forms. All 3 are fakes, all created in January 64 while in custody of the FBI. After these forms were created, they were photographed by the FBI, included among the missing 210 photographs, and returned to Dallas in February 1964. Now, for those interested, photographs of these W-2 forms can be found in the Dallas Police Archives and the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. Why would anyone want to create fake W-2 forms for 3 different companies? Well, the answer is simple: to create a false background for Lee Oswald. In the case of the Pfister Dental Laboratory, to show he worked there in 1956, before he joined the Marines, rather than in 1957 and 58 when he was in Japan. The FBI, through its manipulation of Oswald's possessions, helped cover up their knowledge of 2 Oswalds and his connection to the intelligence community. Hoover knew about 2 Oswalds as early as June 1960 when Oswald was in Russia. At that time, someone using the name Lee Oswald was in New Orleans, trying to buy jeeps to send to Cuba. Hoover sent this memo to his field offices warning them that an imposter may be using Oswald's birth certificate. By the end of January 64, the FBI was finished with Oswald's possessions. Some items had been altered, some changed, some even disappeared. On January 31st, 1964, Hoover sent this memo to Shanklin in Dallas. The Bureau has rephotographed all of the material in possession of the Bureau and will send a complete set of the photographs to you by separate mail. Along with the photographs, Hoover sent a new inventory list. Hoover explained, the inventory list submitted by your office, November 26, 1963, has been superseded by the list furnished to your office by the FBI laboratory, February 1st, 1964. The list submitted by your office is incomplete and is not completely accurate. The list Hoover is referring to as incomplete and inaccurate is Warren Commission Exhibit 2003, the joint FBI Dallas inventory of Oswald's possessions. Now, the FBI had changed and altered items from this list in order to build a case against the lone assassin and create Oswald's false background. A new inventory list was needed to account for the changes made to Oswald's possessions. February 4th, 1964, Shanklin again requested and finally received the missing photographs, the ones he'd requested in December, 2 months ago. A set of photographs was forwarded to the Dallas police, but the police had no idea the photographs they received were not of Oswald's original possessions. The manipulation of Oswald's possessions barely escaped the attention of the Warren Commission. FBI Section Chief Brannigan noticed that items 232 through 248 from a report by Robert Gemberling were marked deleted. Mr. Belmont asked, why were they deleted? He was concerned that the Warren Commission would believe the FBI was holding something back from them. He writes, the Bureau does not desire that the Commission ask any questions about this, and Dallas should either furnish amended pages and renumber the exhibits so that all exhibits are accounted for, or else we should explain why some of the exhibits are missing. They renumbered the exhibits and explained nothing. More cover-up. A few weeks before the Warren report was issued, this internal FBI memo summarized the FBI's positions as to photographs of Oswald's possessions. It states, these photos and list of items has been superseded by photos and inventory list furnished by the Bureau February 1st, 1964, covering items 1 through 455. 8 by 10 enlargements have been furnished to the President's Commission and to the Dallas Police. They were also given to the Dallas Police, Secret Service, and eventually to the National Archives and researchers. They are photos the FBI took of Oswald's various possessions, some original, some altered, some fabricated. Now, how do we know which of these photographs are of Oswald's original possessions? Unfortunately, until each of these items are closely scrutinized, we don't. I can show you how to differentiate questionable FBI photographs from original Dallas police photographs. FBI photographs are either marked FBI or have the identification numbers handwritten. Dallas police photographs, originals, can be identified by a label with a printed identification number as shown on these photographs. The only photographs that can be considered genuine are the Dallas police photographs with numbers printed on the labels. Now, copies of these photographs are still available for inspection and purchase from the Dallas City Archives. So what happened to the original 5 rolls of Dallas police film of Oswald's possessions? The National Archives advises we were unable to locate any documents that describe what happened to this film. If this film had survived, it would be easy to compare the Dallas police film with the FBI film and see the changes. However, this Dallas police film disappeared after being turned over to the FBI. Before concluding my presentation, I would like to briefly summarize what has happened. Some of Oswald's possessions were obtained by the FBI on November 23rd, kept for 2 days, and then returned to the Dallas police. On November 25th, the Dallas police photographed Oswald's possessions, 451 items. On November 26th, the Dallas police and FBI jointly inventoried those 451 items, now Warren Commission Exhibit 2003. These items and the 5 rolls of film were taken to Washington on the 27th. 2 rolls of film were returned to the Dallas police within a week. 3 rolls of film were missing, probably disappeared. During December and January, Oswald's possessions were altered, changed, and some disappeared. They were rephotographed at FBI headquarters, and a new inventory list was created. By February 1964, the missing photographs were finally returned to the Dallas police, but the photographs were not the originals. They were photographs made by the FBI. These photographs helped create Oswald's false background and frame him as the lone assassin. This manipulation of evidence cannot be understated. Employees of the FBI engaged in a criminal conspiracy that involved tampering and withholding of evidence as well as obstruction of justice. By fabricating evidence, they helped create Oswald's background as told by the Warren Commission. They covered up his ties to the intelligence community and helped portray him as the lone assassin. The truth about one of the most important events of our generation was covered up. Had Oswald's possessions been presented to the public in their original, unaltered condition, they would have raised a lot of questions. Questions the government was unprepared to answer. Questions that would arouse suspicion in the public's mind and direct the focus of attention to Lee Harvey Oswald. But that did not happen. In 1964, neither the FBI nor the Warren Commission could afford to have the public focus their attention on Oswald. They found no conspiracy. They concluded Oswald acted alone. The Warren Commission spoon-fed us their version of Oswald's life. Books written by Priscilla Johnson, Robert Oswald, Marguerite Oswald, Gerald Ford, and others echoed the Warren Commission. These dubious people helped create and promote the now familiar image of Lee Oswald, a lonely young man from a broken home, a misunderstood defector, a promoter of communism, and the lone assassin of the president. So much was written about Oswald by so many people that the stage was set for the critics and researchers to investigate everything but Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, for 30 years it worked. There's never been a comprehensive investigation of the life and background of Lee Oswald. In reality and truth, the investigation should have been focused on Oswald, his family, and his background from the beginning. This was true in 1963. It is just as true today. So what can be done? Well, Lee and Marguerite Oswald's federal income tax returns should be released. All files relating to Marguerite and Lee Oswald should be released. Ruth Payne should be subpoenaed and asked to explain not only her involvement with the Oswalds, but her employment and connections for the last 10 years, particularly in Nicaragua. The FBI should explain what happened to the 5 rolls of Dallas police film. They should explain how 1955 and 56 W-2 forms could have IRS tax numbers issued in January of '64, when those forms were in their custody. They should explain what happened to Oswald Stripling Junior High School records, given to them by Mr. Cudlady the day after the assassination. They should explain how they were able to take possession of a Minox camera and have it evolve into a light meter, and why that was done. These items of evidence were deliberately manipulated in order to hide the truth about Oswald's background. Had the original items and documents been made public, they would have allowed us to learn who Lee Oswald really was, the story that has been kept from us for over 30 years. Understand Lee Harvey Oswald, and you will finally begin to understand the forces behind the assassination of President Kennedy. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Okay.
Our next speaker is a young researcher who's been involved in a case for a number of years, and who has certainly done the right thing and said, basically, there's one area I want to look into, and I want to look into it as intensively as I can. And believe me when I tell you, he has done so. In studying the not-so-secret service, Vince Palomar has done an incredible job of bringing some things to light. He was in the post COPA review of last year, when people filled out the little forms and said, what did you like, what were the high points. Vince Palomar's presentation was literally at the top of the scale for what happened last year, and we're very honored to have him back with us this year. So please welcome and give your full attention to Vince Palomar as we continue Conspiracy in the Round.
Thank you. Back in 1988, I took an intense interest in the assassination. In 1990, based off that intense interest, I focused on the Secret Service. There was many things that the Secret Service did and did not do that struck me at the time. But this was before I had done any primary research, had spoken to any of the former agents. At the time, frankly, I just didn't have the courage to call any of them or make any kind of contact. But just through the years, I just saw more and more things that led me to question. And originally, I saw everything in black and white. Everything was sinister. I think we all start out that way. We don't see shades of gray a lot of times. Everything's, cuts one way or another. So to make a long story short, when I started to contact these gentlemen, slowly but surely, I expected them to, for lack of a better phrase, debunk some of my early theories, speculations, whatnot. Surprisingly, not only did they corroborate many of them, they added many more layers of questions. I'm here today in 1996 to tell you that I really don't have a straight black and white answer for you. While I do not think that the Secret Service was sinisterly involved in a conspiracy, I have a hard time, a very hard time, after what I've uncovered in all the primary documentation and contacts I've made, sweeping everything I've found away as innocent, albeit gross negligence. And like I said in my abstract, it's a prelude to disaster. The presidential protective measures used and ignored by the Secret Service up to and including November 22nd, 1963, a visual investigation. I'd like to thank, he's obviously not here, Jim Cedrone from the JFK Library, provided me with many films and the Cecil Stoughton photographs, some of which are going to appear in this video. Other ones, he was very kind to identify to the greatest certainty he could many of the motorcade footage and whatnot that I compiled. Like I'm sure a couple of you in this room, I have a pretty extensive video library, to put it mildly, and I went through and I compiled as many motorcades as I could during the Kennedy years. Very hard to find. Again, it's Jim Cedrone, the library said they remember your entrances and your exits, and everything else in the middle doesn't mean anything. Well, I tell you what, if you see a lot of documentaries, they usually show the inaugural motorcade, and they show Dallas. Not too many other ones, and that's created a lot of confusion. And I'm here to dispel that confusion and to spell out in a visual format what I've uncovered. So here goes. Okay, this is Bogota, Colombia. Two agents, Bob Lilly and Roy Kellerman, on the back of the presidential limousine. There's the full bubble top. Excellent motorcycle formation, close fallout car. Sam Kinney was driving that fallout car, was maintaining the normal distance. Bright, sunny day. Bob Lilly told me that many times the bubble top was on either partial or full in this configuration. Mexico City, summer 1962. There's an agent right there, walking on Kennedy's side, motorcycle next to Kennedy, close follow-up car.
I really didn't want to jump ahead to anything that happens in Dallas, but I will tell you, supposedly, President Kennedy did not want motorcycles next to him. This is from the JFK Library. This is President Kennedy's trip to Italy. That, by the way, is Winston Lawson hanging onto the back of the limousine. What's the problem? Well, according to a report after the fact, President Kennedy was dead, it alleged that President Kennedy did not want agents riding on the rear of the presidential limousine in Italy, and none were on there. And this has turned out to be false. Soon we will be coming up to, this was edited because this was just a government services film, and the motorcade is actually just a supplement to the rest of footage of that trip. Motorcycle formation is excellent and normal. He normally had anywhere between 12 to 18 motorcycles, usually anywhere between at least 5 to 9 on each side, very close fall apart. And if you'll notice, the press was in front of the limousine and behind the limousine. Normal standard procedure, clear overpass, another standard procedure. Never should have anyone on the overpasses. This is Germany, June 1963. Again, agents on the rear of the limousine. Good motorcycle formation. Special Agent in Charge Gerald Bain, who I spoke to, riding in the front seat of the limousine. And although in this particular motion picture it's hard to see, military aide Ted Clifton is sitting in the front seat. This was standard, almost without exception, whether it was Washington, D.C. or foreign or domestic trip, military aides rode in the front of the limo. This is England, July '63. Full bubble top. President Kennedy allegedly did not want ever. So there it is. Again, no rain. Another myth that it was only used for inclement weather. 3 agents I spoke to, Bob Lilly, Sam Kinney, Rufus Youngblood, and another one, Thomas Keller, before the House Select Committee, admitted the bubble top was a deterrent, would shield prospective assassins' view via the sun's glare, possibly deflect a bullet, and many people thought it was bulletproof, so in that respect it was a psychological deterrent, if nothing else. This is slow motion, obviously. This is, again, in the course of much other interesting human interest type of footage, but I've tried to segregate just the pertinent footage here. And that's the driver, Bill Greer. Bill Greer, 90 to 95% of the times drove the presidential limousine, and Sam Kinney, again, 90 to 95% of the time drove this fall apart. This is Germany, I call part 2. This is the Cecil Stoughton photo. You saw this in motion. There's Chuck Zaboral. I'm not sure who the other agent is, but again, riding on the rear of the limousine. And if you haven't noticed yet, these are obviously foreign trips. I'll focus on the foreign trips first. Here's the press. Imagine in Dallas, if this press would have been here like they normally would. Here's the motorcycles. There's agents on the side of the limousine. Chuck again. I'm not sure who this gentleman is, but I know that he was at least around to the Nixon days. And if you notice the change in cars, that's one of 2 well-used 1956 Cadillac convertibles that were sometimes used as the presidential limousine. There's Roy Kellerman, right beside Kennedy. This is Latin America, 1962. Again, if you read up on Jim Bishop, William Manchester, and the Warren Report and some of the reports and volumes after the fact, none of this should be happening because supposedly President Kennedy didn't want these things. And they have a direct bearing on what happened on the Texas trip, but there's more to come here. Jerry Bain, Special Agent in Charge of the White House detail, did not make the Texas trip. There's Floyd Warren, his number 2 assistant. Protocol, these men always either went with the president by themselves or together. Here's Jerry Bain instructing the president where to exit the vehicle. President Kennedy had an adorable quality. Sometimes he forgot which way to enter and exit his speech site. Here he is in Fort Worth, the morning of the assassination, conferring with Roy Kellerman, Paul Burns, where to go after he greeted the crowd. Again, it's repeated. There's John Reddy there. Secret Service, he liked the Secret Service and he never interfered with any interactions. Everything he would do is wade into the crowds. He relied on them. Here's to dispel some misconceptions. This is candidate Kennedy. There were no Secret Service protection for candidates back then. He relied on local police and bodyguards. So this has created confusion, perspective confusion by some people maybe. Example 2, military bases. There was no overt protection of any kind. No bubble top, not even motorcycles. Obviously nobody clinging to the back of the limousine because you had our forces who were on very friendly ground. Examples, plural, number 3. This is Washington, D.C. Again, no real overt protection. The only thing they did was they would use 2 fallout cars. And interesting, but there's the partial bubble there. They just have it on the driver's side this time. This is when King Hassan came to Morocco, summer of '63. I think actually this is around September. And again, what they would do, and to answer a question maybe that I haven't, is, well, okay, why in Washington, D.C. wouldn't they have that kind of overt protection? The reason why was because Washington, D.C. was a security man's dream. They had literally all the buildings checked, employee manifests, manholes sealed and protected. They did not need that. It would be a waste of time. The only thing he did was had 2 fallout cars, a lot of motorcycles before and after, but not on the side. And another customary thing was to have military lining the street, facing the crowd. Normal thing. Another thing that creates confusion, final example here, the inaugural. People see this and probably think, well, Kennedy didn't want the bubble top or any of this stuff. Look at this. Again, Washington, D.C. The late Jim Cedrone at the JFK Library said they remember your entrances and exits. That's why 90% of the media request the inaugural and the assassination films. They really don't care about this stuff. This is ancillary at best. Here's El Paso, Texas, June 5th, 1963. The initial planning of the Texas trip. There's Jerry Bain, who is in the front seat. Bill Greer is driving the car. Governor Connolly is sitting in the back seat. Agents rode on the back of the limousine off and on this trip. Jerry Bain obviously did not make the Texas trip. He took his very first vacation. He was in the White House detail since 1941, and other than maybe a day here and there, never took an actual vacation. And he accrued all that federal leave, took it the weekend of the president's murder. The number 2 man did not make it to Dallas. Number 3 man, third stringer was making his first trip on his own. September 25th, Ashland, Wisconsin. There's President Kennedy on this side. Agents walking by the car. Press bus right there. Imagine if in Dallas they would have been in a traditional position. And obviously from the angle, press was in front. That's another thing that's unstated in these films and photographs, that the press was in a traditional position in front. We wouldn't need an Abraham Zapruder. We would have many multiple angles of professional film. This segment's repeated here. Okay, this backtracks a little bit in the sequence. This is obviously John Glenn, February '62. This is basically just to show there was a couple different cars. Everybody thinks of the SX-100 limousine, well, there were several versions of it. Here's the motorcycle policemen doing their job. Right there, intercepting the crowd right beside the car. This was basically just included to show what the motorcycle people did besides riding on the car. They were also to intercept, well-meaning well-wishers. It's too close. Billings, Montana, September '63, from the Kennedy Library. Agents ride on the back of the car. Some military aid, standard stuff. He either rode with Kennedy in the jump seats or in the front seat. And someone was questioning this. Yes, the seat is raised here. That was at the president's discretion. There's JFK, there's military, I'm not sure who this is, but there it's raised there. And this car, let's know the speed of the car, it's at the proximity.
usually flew at least 30 miles an hour at the least, but usually upwards of 50. And when that trip to Bogota, Colombia showed, they were going upwards of 70, 80 miles an hour with these men riding on the back of the car. Here's a clip of it in real time. Again, these are from general services, government services, films, so you got to keep in mind this motorcade footage was not the primary focus. Again, military aide Clifton, Warren McHugh. There's Greer, there's Gerald Bain, who normally sat in this position. Someone with a jumpsuit. Again, this is just to show what was standard procedure. We're getting closer to the Texas trip here. This is still Billings, Montana. There's Roy Kellerman. Okay, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, October 19th, 1963. You'll see this is going to fade in. There's Floyd Boring, military aide, Bill Greer, JFK, motorcycles riding right next to him, but supposedly in Dallas, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, he did not want motorcycles next to him. He didn't like that. It was his desire. He supposedly didn't want agents in the back of the car, bubble pops, motorcycles. He wanted the ride change. He didn't want the trademark, on and on and on. Jim Cedrone was amazing with this clip. This is 3 weeks before Dallas. Jerry Bain, and there's President Kennedy getting into a bubble top car. But remember now, you doing your reading, he supposedly didn't want bubble tops. 3 weeks before Dallas, he didn't mind getting into a car with a bubble top. It's only through, like I said, contacting these men. A lot of these discoveries, for lack of a better term, were accidental. I expected them to confirm a lot of things before I did my own reading, thinking, and contacting these men and getting the corroboration. Special agent in charge, Jerry Bain, the man who was up in the door for him, said Kennedy never interfered with their actions at all. Floyd Boring, number 2 man, said the same thing. He's never, not once in a while, never. It started to sound like a broken record. Rufus Youngblood passed away about a week and a half ago. Echoed the same thing. In fact, I'm quoting him now. He said President Kennedy wasn't a hard ass. This is 4 days before Dallas, Tampa, Floyd Boring. You're never going to see Kellerman with the president before Dallas. He's a 3rd stringer. Emory Roberts, who will focus in Dallas, Floyd Boring, president. Don Lawton, who I spoke to both of these gentlemen. Emory Roberts passed away, but I'll get to that. Chuck Zaboral. Chuck Zaboral was probably one of the most, reluctant people to talk to me when I started getting into these things. He interrupted our conversation when I said about President Kennedy's alleged desires. He said, "Where did you read that?" And he goes, "Do you want me commenting officially? I'm speaking to someone I don't even know." Needless to say, I struck a nerve. Chuck, about to get on the back of the car, and you'll see Don Lawton getting on the back of the car. Again, you read your over-the-counter history in your public libraries. President Kennedy was the most difficult president to protect. He didn't want any of these measures. It's just the opposite. And this is from NBC. This was rebroadcast in 1988 on the A&E network. This is Houston, day before. We go to the original plan, 18 motorcycles, style limousine. President Kennedy supposedly didn't desire this at the November 21st meeting of the Secret Service. The November 20th meeting, no Secret Service men were present, and this original plan was used, ironically, despite the verbal change, was used in all the prior Texas stops except for Dallas. This is Fort Worth, the morning of the murder. Here's a motorcycle right beside Kennedy. Right there. And you even see an agent running by briefly, I think. That's that kind of stuff. Even the high select community said that this was uniquely insecure what the Secret Service did. And this you might remember from last year. This is love field WFA footage. Secret Service, again, I'm not out to denigrate them totally. They did a great job here. This is, again, modern day stuff. Roy Kellerman, first major trip on his own, by Bainer Boring. Imagine going to the Super Bowl to make an analogy and get your 3rd stringer who never really had any experience in there. This is basically what this is. Dallas was a hot city. They went by cold, warm, and hot in their ratings of cities. Dallas, long before General Walker or anything, was a hot city. PRS found no threats despite 3 checks in Dallas. Rabid right-wing country, nut country. He found nobody who wished ill the president. Again, this is from last year, Henry Rivka. And new reports, the AARB, we have to thank, the shift reports for the month of November. He rode in the San Antonio and Houston and Fort Worth follow cars. He was not the driver. He was a protected agent. The new Sturgis film shows him jumping out of the follow car as well. First agent on, again, not the driver. Uh-oh, here comes Emory Roberts to rise in his seat. And they have him stop what he's doing. Now this is actually on the footage here. You can see his hand gestures back. I've slowed this down, obviously. You can find this in David Wolper's presentation. He raises his hand with his, telling him to jump back, and there's Henry there saying what gives. Paul Landis is making room for Henry on the follow car. And it gets better or worse depending on which way you want to look at it. And the new Secret Service shift reports from the ARB and the archives. Emory Roberts made not one mistake. Like I said last year, I was wrong. He made 2 mistakes in 2 separate reports. He placed Rivka in the center rear seat. Then later on, he said, I was mistaken, he remained at left field. So for some reason, he thought he didn't get on the follow car. And to make matters worse, Winston Lawson, in his final survey report, makes the same mistake. But strangely, Henry Rivka is not even mentioned at all in the preliminary report. So something's really, again, he's still doing it there. In real time, sources for this over the counter is David Wolper's 4 Days in November. You can see this for yourself. I was not aware that that was actually relatively commonly available here. Okay, again, this is, if I had to summarize foreign trips, agents on or near the rear of limousine by John F. Kennedy, motorcycles, the quantity and quality of formation by JFK side, military aid, special agent Charge Bain and Boring on trips. Press was in front or near the limo, bus was near the limo to the rear, bubble top partial or full, not always used but a common thing. Speed of the car is crucial in proximity. Clear overpasses. In fact, in Stoughton's book, page 160 from 1973, Jackie had said after the Italy trip that she wanted Stoughton to stay in the fog car to take pictures from now on. And he did up to November 21st. November 22nd, Dave Powers took his place and Stoughton was far in the back of the motorcade. I wrote to the gentleman and he would not answer my question of who or why he was placed in the back, near out of sight of Dallas. Like I said last year, here's spectators on this side of the street. Emory Roberts tried to make the excuse of why General Ready didn't do his job, but there was no spectators on that side of the street. That's why they didn't have to protect Kennedy. So it's either his fault or there's no spectators or the weather. I'm sure we can all think of some more excuses, but it doesn't wash anymore. Roy Kellerman said no obstacle would stand in his way during his poignant Warren Commission testimony, but he sees the president hit. In fact, they all do. And rather than doing anything, even in vain, he turns back to Bill Greer and says, get out of line, we've been hit. Bill Greer's already looked back. This is his second look back. Disobeys a direct order from his superior. Kennedy is killed. 5 different agents take responsibility for radioing to Lawson in the lead car about getting to Parkland Hospital. There's only one channel. 4 of them are lying. Which ones, I don't know. It's your guess as good as mine. During Jesse Curry's LBJ Library oral history, he said that there was no radio communication between the limousine and the lead car, and Lawson's portable radio, quote, was not working too well at the time. Again, with all due respect to the incredible amount of work that's been done by authors and researchers, and they've done work long before I was even, around in this case. It gets down to basics here. Secret Service did their job, we wouldn't be here. And all the endless excuses and scenarios we can conjure up, why did they blame Kennedy after the fact? In reports, why did William Manchester allege that Lloyd Boring heard President Kennedy say, quote, get those ugly charlatans off the back of the car, Floyd Boring tells me he never spoke to Manchester. You see Manchester's notes, and it's true, he was never interviewed. Where did he get the quote? Henry Roberts was interviewed twice by Manchester. That's a possible source. That was Foreign's trip summary. As far as in America, summary of security deficiencies. No military lining the route. Facing a crowd, standard stuff. No agents on or near the limousine by JFK. This was blamed on President Kennedy. There was only 4 motorcycles not even flanking the limousine. No military riding in the limo. McHugh or Clifton. McHugh even said this was unusual in 1976. No bubble top, partial or full. Okay, we could say he didn't always have a bubble top, but he blamed it on Kennedy. Sam Kennedy told me it's in his Warren Commission volume report, volume 18. He was solely responsible for the removal. Well, I had to blame it on Kennedy. Here's Henry Ribby getting out of the fog car at Carswell Air Force Base. So he was a protective agent. But the new reports coming up in the ARB confirmed that anyway. Special Agent George Bain, number 2 man Boring were absent against protocol. Kellerman, number 3 man first major trip on his own. Stu Knight, of the Special Agent in charge of the VP detail, was not on the trip. Rufus Youngblood was supposed to replace him on November 25th. Because what happened in Dallas, he rose higher and Stu Knight went way back. Salinger, press secretary, was not there. Third stringer, Malcolm Killip, on his first major trip on his own. We know what happened. Press further back. Press buses, photographers, and Cecil Stone, who rode there up to the 21st. Motorcade route was changed. Jerry Bain confirmed this for me. He said the House Select Committee asked him in executive session why the motorcade route was changed. He said it was. It's a contrast. Secret Service, despite criticisms, did their job this day. Spoke to this man, Jerry Parr, deserves the medal. Did an outstanding job. Instead, their agile mind, fleetness of foot, didn't have a revved up supercar, didn't even have the amount of seconds the men in Dealey Plaza had. Despite criticisms, and despite what we might think about President Reagan, the man lived, the country was saved another savage assassination. And again, the contrast. I'm picking up where I left off. There were alternate routes, Sam Kinney and Wynn Lawson confirms to me. They were not spelled out and obviously not used. The route itself violated Secret Service regulations, as we see, because of the turns. Turns over 190 degrees were against Secret Service regulations. It was 120 degree on Elm Street. The slow speed, it was a warehouse district, which Chief Inspector Michael Trina said was the deadliest place to bring a president. It was published against regulations, which was denied by the Secret Service, but they did it. My chief suspects are Greer, Roberts, and Boring. Roberts ordered the men not to move on Elm Street, according to Sam Kinney. Sam Kinney confirmed a statement that I thought was exaggerated in high treason, and it's vindicated because Sam said exactly right. We know about his recall of John Reddy, which he blamed on the speed of the limousine in the fog car. But the speed of the car is actually 11.2 miles per hour. Not the 25 to 30 miles per hour they said in the reports. The cars were only 5 feet apart. They said in the reports it was 20 to 25 feet apart. We know about Greer's 2 looks back and his disobeying of his direct order, and Roy Kellerman's look back. The overpass in Dealey Plaza was not clear. PRS, despite 3 checks in rabid right-wing Dallas nut country, nothing was found. A PRS man was making his first major trip in the follow-up car. That's like someone who works a desk job. What's he doing in the follow-up car? That's Glenn Bennett, by the way. He made a crucial observation. Dr. Berkeley, over protests, was driven further back in the motorcade. Ambulance on standby was gone, whether we believe the alleged seizure victims or not. No squad car was deleted over the protests of Chief Curry, but it was used in, for example, New York on November 14th. Sheriff's Department was told to stand down between November 21st and 22nd. The motorcade order was changed, confirmed by new House Select Committee documents over an interview with Winston Lawson, including the presidential limo, press buses, and the mayor's car. The lead car was the closed sedan. Translation, useless. Umbrella Man was not stopped or noted about. Neither described, written or oral. We might say, forget about this thing about him being an assassin. Forget even about a signal. At the Beltsville, Maryland, James Raleigh training facility, men with open umbrellas pop up at mock motorcades to this day. And in the Secret Service rule book, you're supposed to look out for things like that. The drinking incident of November 21st to 22nd involved 4 agents on the fallout car. One of them was Paul Landis here, and the others were Clint Hill, John Reddy, and the aforementioned Glenn Bennett. Secret Service agents of mysterious repute appeared in Dealey Plaza, as we know. And the bottom line on all of this is JFK and LBJ were in the same city, same motorcade, and slow-moving open vehicles in close proximity to each other. Again, this was blamed on John Kennedy, and I can tell you right now, I spoke to about 20 to 25 agents, and they debunked it. Kennedy had nothing to do with this. And we're here today because of their actions and their inactions. Thank you.
Introduce Walt Brown. Walt Brown is the author of several major books on the case, including the latest, The Warren Omission, outstanding study of the Warren Report. It's not the same old thing. He's done an excellent distillation of all the anomalies using the primary source material. Also the author of Treachery in Dallas, The People versus Lee Harvey Oswald, and the JFK Quiz Book.
Thanks, Vince. Good morning, everybody. Because it always seems that we have audio-visual problems first thing in the morning, we did today. The panel, which we are very pleased to have Mr. Pepper, the attorney for Martin Luther King, will start immediately at the conclusion of this. I'm going to go through this very rapidly. I'll omit the customary banter to get to the point because it is extremely important. What I'm going to talk to you today very briefly, some of it will very much parallel what John Armstrong said. Some of it will just kind of inferentially relate to what Vince said. So this I hope will coalesce well. The last thing I did when I finished Warren Omission was I was able to secure the 2 tapes from the LBJ library. And if you haven't heard these, you ought to. And please stop by my table or see me. And if you're interested in a copy of these, we'll work out a way to get them. This is the cover-up right here. Everything you've heard about, everything you've seen is on tape. It's LBJ talking to these people. And again, I'm going to run through it as fast as I can this morning. This is the formation of the Warren Commission. 2 of these conversations are November 24th. One is November 24th. 2 are while LBJ is putting his pants on to go to Kennedy's funeral. And then the rest are on November 29th, the day of the commission. If you have a doubting friend, play this for him or get him a chapter in Warren Omission. And the concept of cover-up will be forever dispelled, or get them those W-2 forms that John Armstrong showed you, because they are available through the DPD archives. The first phone call is background, and it does involve LBJ. It's Rostow and Moyers, and it says, world opinion and American opinion are just now so shaken by the behavior of the Dallas police that they are not believing anything. And it's really the keynote for what is to follow. You will not hear one syllable about truth or justice in these tapes. Nobody ever says, listen, we're going to have a presidential commission to get to the bottom of it, to get to the truth. No, we're going to do this for totally other reasons, and that's what's so crucial about it. Again, Johnson's putting his pants on and he's talking to J. Edgar Hoover. That's a dangerous thought, because, you know. LBJ does not want a commission, which we think would be very bad. Hoover agrees. LBJ, we can't be checking up on every shooting scrape in the country. President of the United States is murdered, and 3 days later, before he's buried, it's a shooting scrape. There's 2 ways to handle this. The FBI can give a full report to the Attorney General, who's not going to say anything in his grief, or we can make it a state matter, and the state of Texas will cooperate with the FBI. And he, Wagner Carr, the state Attorney General, who was flown up to the White House to take orders on November 24th, and it says so, understands what you, J. Edgar Hoover, are doing. And after you saw what Mr. Armstrong presented about what the FBI was doing, it fits together like shuffling a deck of cards. Hoover says a commission would be like a circus. It would be just like an investigating committee. Yes, they would investigate. So we can't have that. They mention, it gets into a conversation with Joseph Alsop. who he keeps saying, I don't want you to have a commission, you've done everything right. And he keeps saying, no commission, so that there will be one. But he also says that the left won't believe the FBI, and the FBI can't write very well. Well, they did a good job in what you saw. He speaks of a 3-man panel to review the FBI report in a PR way. And again, no look for justice, and a commission to investigate, and this is the exact quote, would be a useful, happy thing. And he says, what I'm really giving you is public relations advice. And that's all of what this is about. There's a call then to James Eastland, who was planning to hold hearings, quote, to prove this man was the assassin. That's not why you hold hearings. Then they play the Texas card again. Look, it's a state matter. Let's let them deal with it. Then the Warren Commission idea, or a commission idea, comes up to review the FBI report. And Johnson says, this is a very explosive thing and could be a very dangerous thing to this country. And then he turns to a review of the facts with Eastland. In other words, we can't let you get into these things. Now we jump ahead, and all the rest is November 29th. He talks to Hale Boggs. Serious things are presenting themselves on all these investigations, quote, on the Dallas thing. But he doesn't yet offer Boggs the spot. And in these phone calls, it's like, if it's okay with your mother scenario. What he's saying is, look, I'm going to appoint a whole bunch of people. And he tells Richard Russell that, he tells Jerry Ford that, he tells Hale Boggs that. But he doesn't say, I'm going to appoint you. And they all say, oh, I think it's a good idea, Mr. President. Then he comes back to him and says, by the way, you're on it. Well, I don't want to be on it. Well, you thought it was a good idea. Now you're on it. It's already out. And they're announcing it on C-SPAN as we speak. He calls Everett Dirksen. And he tells him, I don't want the House and the Senate getting involved on the Dallas affair. Hoover is concerned. He's making a very full report. Some international complications if we are not very careful. We need a group that the world will have confidence in. Not that we'll investigate thoroughly, not that we'll find, but the world will have confidence in. Boggs then calls him and tells that Charles Goodell has gone out on the House floor and says, we should do something. And Boggs jumped in and said, oh, I have it on presidential authority that something is going to be done, but it doesn't have to be done by the House. A later conversation, Johnson has forgotten who Goodell was, but he said some jerk got up in the House today and said they should investigate. And he said Boggs was just as foolish to get up and say, don't worry, the president's going to do it. So in a sense, Hale Boggs forced the president's hand. Abe Fortas checks in and says, the best way to handle this. Again, this is not born of grief. It's born of very clear concern that the truth not slip out. They name some politically correct players, and they bypass the people in committee situations who by seniority and tenure would have gotten the jobs. They don't, they run off a shopping list on the tapes and say, no, I don't want him to do it, I don't want him to do it. They're putting people in place, and I'll be referencing that later, who are safe, who will not wreck the boat, who will keep an eye over the thing. And it says so in so many words. LBJ, the only way, now he's back to Hoover. And the last thing to Fortas was, I guess we ought to talk to these fellows before we appoint them. Now, the Hoover thing. Again, I'm sorry that I'm hurrying, but you know the reasons for that. There's a 20-minute conversation with J. Edgar Hoover. And the whole backdrop of that is that this commission is going to review the FBI report, ratify it, and put it out. Now, where is the FBI as of November 29th? Well, John Armstrong showed us where they were in point of fact. Hoover tells us a whole different story. And the bottom line is they are claiming or proving an ignorance that is beyond fathomable 7 days after the murder. Hoover is discussing a group LBJ, group to study your report. LBJ wants an FBI report as the only way to stop the investigations and to appoint a high-level commission to evaluate and then prevent the House and the Senate and Texas from going ahead. Hoover thinks Dulles is okay. He's uncertain about John McCloy because he's afraid he's a publicity hound. He agrees to the concept of Loris Norstad, who was the commanding general of NATO. They thought they'd have a military person on there at the time. He agreed to Boggs, he agreed to Ford, he agreed to Russell, and he agreed to, and the name comes across on the tape as Cupper, John Sherman Cooper. And Khrushchev on the tape comes across as Khrushchev. And LBJ says to Hoover, not surprisingly, you and me been talking like brothers. And then he says, I think Russell will oversee the general situation and Cooper will oversee the liberals. And I love this because we know Gerald Ford set 40-yard dash records from the Warren Commission to the FBI with information. Johnson says to Ford, "Do you know Gerald Ford?" Hoover says, "I know of him, but I don't know him." Well, you will. Hoover, we hope to get this thing wrapped up today. The angle in Mexico is giving us a great deal of trouble. We have information that Oswald got $6,500 from someone in the Cuban embassy and came back to the United States with it. Now, again, this parallels what John Armstrong was talking about. He said, we have evidence that Oswald was in Mexico City on September 18th. But there's a problem because we also have definitive evidence he was in New Orleans on September 18th. But he doesn't say the third statement, like something's wrong there. He says, then we have further proof that he was in Mexico City on November 28th. The Mexican police have again arrested Sylvia Duran, and they will hold her for 2 to 3 days, confront her with the original informant. It sounds, when you hear on the tape, it sounds like thumb screws in the rack, basically. Like, we're going to get her to change her story, because we can't have this out there. And they're going to give her a lie detector test to prove our point. And then Hoover goes on to tell how useless lie detectors are. So it's point-counterpoint. With respect to Oswald, we have very definitive evidence. No question but that he is the man. And the only evidence that Hoover offers is his fingerprints. There is no connection between Ruby and Oswald. Quote, there was a story, but it's not confirmed. Well, of course it wasn't. They weren't going to confirm it. And then he goes on to say there are a number of stories. And then he gets into Rubenstein. You know, and that's how you bash Jack Ruby. Revel O. Oliver did it. General Walker did it. There's a strong anti-Semitic tone the way they do it, and Hoover is just as guilty. He says Rubenstein has a bad record. He's a thug and an egomaniac. When you hear J. Edgar Hoover describing somebody as an egomaniac, it's kind of like me standing up here and saying I don't like somebody's research because they're short. But he's an egomaniac. He took care of the cops, which is how he got into the DPD. He was a police character. Oswald, on the other hand, was in the ACLU, which tars him immediately. Fair Play for Cuba, which was dominated by communism and financed by Castro. LBJ then asked the magic question, how many shots were fired? I'm thinking, hello, you were there. And were any at me? And I'm thinking, well, if there had been, the way it worked out, you would have felt this burning sensation and known, yes, that one was fired at you. And then we get into Hoover's, out of the loop by intent, or we don't know. 3 shots were fired, all at Kennedy. 2 were splintered, but they could ballistically link the splintered shots to the rifle. JFK was hit by the 1st and the 3rd, and this is the report that the commission is going to ratify. 1st and 3rd hit JFK, the 2nd hit Connally. The 3rd shot is the pristine bullet that they have. It rolled out of Kennedy's head intact. It's pristine. There was some heart massage done on the way to the hospital. The bullet was found on the stretcher. They were aiming at the president. Hoover says he has looked through the telescopic lens and it's like seeing somebody sitting right behind you. That's how easy it is. And then Johnson, in the subsequent phone calls, which I'm not going to have time to go through, tells the people he's appointing, he said, look, there's nothing to this. Edgar sat and looked through the telescope on that gun, even though it only cost $21. And he says, it's like sitting right next to you, so don't worry about that. The 3 shots, and this is Hoover again, the 3 shots we're able to prove could have been fired in 3 seconds. So this concern with speed is not a concern. They could have fired the 3 shots in 3 seconds. Connally turned at the sound of the 1st shot and got hit. He wouldn't have been hit if he hadn't turned. So then Johnson says, and they go back and forth, their conclusion is Kennedy would have been hit 3 times if Connally hadn't turned. Now that can only talk about a shooter from the front, but they don't mention it. We know Oswald was on the 5th floor. All the evidence was on the 5th floor. The paper, the bag, the fingerprints were all over, which they really weren't. The shells, the one unfired shell, all on the 5th floor, and it keeps being referenced. Then the gun was thrown aside. He was stopped by a policeman at the entrance to the building. Now, if you know 6 hours after the shooting what junior high school he went to for 2 weeks, and you don't know that Marion Baker caught him in the 2nd floor lunchroom, and you think he stopped him at the entrance, there's 2 sets of data happening there that are troubling. He was cleared by a building worker. He took a bus home. Dallas police had William Whaley identify him on Saturday. And they're saying he took a bus home, the cabbie. He got a jacket for some reason. He was walking. Tippit stopped him, quote, not knowing who he was. He stopped him either because he thought he was a presidential assassin, which is the only reason you stopped somebody that day, or because he knew exactly who he was, but not knowing who he was. He killed the cop. We can prove that. He went to a theater. The ticket window lady was suspicious of him and said he was carrying a gun. And then he said he had a revolver. The police and our man were there for the arrest, and Oswald fought like a lion. And when I heard that on the tape, I think of that MGM lion that kind of yawns at the beginning of the movie. He came down 5 flights of stairs from the 5th floor. I don't know how you come down. I mean, you come down 4 flights of stairs from the 5th floor. The elevator wasn't a concern. Oswald was strongly pro-communist, strongly anti-American, ACLU, FP, had been writing a bunch of stuff to the Soviet embassy, but then he clarifies that it was about his wife's visa. Yet, no indication of violence. And if that isn't a CIA memo, I don't know what is. The wife, according to Hoover, is hostile. She's not talking. If, however, she gets assurances that she will be allowed to stay in the United States, she will cooperate. So Hoover is told, be given the insurance, give her the assurances. And he had just sent a Russian-speaking agent in. Oswald walked on all the floors. Witnesses absolutely put him on the 5th floor. The 5th floor. Johnson asked, do you have a picture of him firing the shots? And he said, no. He said, well, then what did this guy sell for $25,000? Here's what Zapruder sold for actually $150. He said, it was a picture of the parade showing Mrs. Kennedy climbing out. Well, you just saw the picture of the parade. Then Hoover tells Johnson what happened, as if Johnson had never been to Texas before in his life. He said, you know, there was no Secret Service man on the car, which parallels Vince. And he said, and the bubble top wasn't on. Now, if Johnson didn't know that by the time a week later, I mean, Hoover is telling it as if he's explaining it to the Prime Minister of Uganda, who was with 7 mistresses during the event. You know, while the shots were from this building and they had just turned a corner, LBJ is 2 cars back. The Dallas cops, there was plenty of security, so he's taking the FBI off the hook. The Dallas cops were there, but they were watching the parade. And then this next line is powerful. Quote, you also had a lot of soldiers, but they were also watching the parade. And Vince's material showed us very clearly there's always a military presence there, right in the car, except in Dallas. And of course, Donald Sutherland and JFK, you know, we would have had men there. There wouldn't have been, you know, raincoats and umbrellas at open windows. Well, there would have been. But there would have been security. Where are these soldiers he's talking about? Where's he getting this from? And then LBJ and Hoover wrap it up. You know, you've been my brother and friend for 25 or 30 years, and LBJ wants to bypass the Secret Service and get a series of recommendations on his own security from Hoover, which then gives Johnson in a sidebar the justification to put $20 million worth of security into the ranch. I mean, Hoover's literally saying, don't drive on your ranch in Austin without a bulletproof car, because snipers can sneak into your ranch. So, you know, the rest is history as that goes. He calls Richard Russell, and this is where things get really ugly, and it gets uglier as it goes on. I'm trying to avoid a lot of possible concerns. We want to bring in the 3 branches, a couple of people from the House, a couple of people from the Senate, a couple of people from the court. The work can be done by the staff. Russell agrees and thinks Hoover should wait on issuing a report. And Johnson says, no, he's going to get out as fast as he can. And all Russell says is, uh-oh. He says, he ain't going to publish this damn thing, is he? Why not? LBJ says, he's going to turn it over to this group. There are some things about it I can't talk about. Russell says, I understand that. And Russell says, you know, but don't even think about me because I don't have the time. And he says, well, it's not. Johnson says right back to him, it's not going to take much time. And Russell proved it because, as we know, from the day the Warren Commission was appointed until September 6th, Richard Russell asked a total of 4 questions. So he didn't put the time in. LBJ tells him how easy it was to make the shots. Russell repeats, I don't want to do it. LBJ says it's important. The CIA is worried, and Russell happens to be on an oversight committee. So he's their man. And LBJ is clearly looking for a back channel. Russell says, is Hoover going to be on it? And LBJ says, no, it's his report. And Russell says, oh, yeah, that makes sense. You're going to have somebody from Justice of the Court. And then the problem comes up was, what if this thing gets to the courts with Ruby? What if Ruby's appeal goes to the Supreme Court and one of the guys sat on it? That's as far as I'll take the time. If anybody, again, how evidence gets misplaced. The last conversation on here, the very last one, is 18 minutes. It's at 8:55 p.m. on that night. The Warren Commission has already been announced, and it's a call to Richard Russell, and Johnson says to him, by the way, you've been appointed. And he just screams bloody murder. I will not serve with Warren because of his court decisions on segregation, blah, blah, blah. And LBJ leaves it like, I'm the president, and you goddamn well will serve. And as we know, he served. If anybody can get one of those little players, I'll play these for you back there, in the vending room. We'll keep it on a loop. If anybody has an interest, please see me. Thank you again, and I look forward to the next presentation. And thanks to Vince and John.